Happy Monday, friends. We're here in Pink Pixels and we are soaking in the energy of the spring. Hopefully, the warm weather is reaching to you, or at least a few sun rays, right? This is our opportunity to reflect, to refresh, and of course, to focus on what growth we have for ourselves in this new year and find ourselves planted in soil and space that is going to encourage us, that's going to water us, that's going to help us flourish to find where we want to be and not trap us or dehydrate us, which reminds me I should take a drink of water real quick because we never drink enough water. So cheers to all my friends out there. Here we are. I'm so excited that we're here this evening. Every Monday, we have amazing individuals. In fact, I see in the chat Tony Dominique, who is one of our Pink Picks winners. So congratulations. A little shout out for you. I'm so excited that you dropped by. Hello, hello. And so many other friends. This is a space where we build community. Coming week after week, learning from each other's stories, it makes it such a rich and beautiful experience. And tonight, let me tell you, we're going to get into some good stories. We're going to get into some good, rich discussions with our new friend, Emily. So let me bring her on over. Everyone, come say hello to Saundering Emily tonight. Say hello.
Hello, I'm Emily. I am a content creator based in Los Angeles, and I make videos about game development. I share game development tips and insight, my favorite indie games, inclusivity in the industry, and also the occasional meme. I am a game developer first and foremost, though. I founded Soldering Studio. We are an indie game studio creating artistic narrative games that focus on Asian American representation. We create games that touch people's hearts with stunning visuals and an emotional story.
I love that. I love that. So I'm going to work my way backwards through all this information you gave us about yourself and start with the heartfelt stories, right? Because there's a lot of different game genres out there or the way games impact us. Why did you decide, you know what, I'm going to go for the heart punch, right? You just want to twist our heartstrings a little bit. Why that angle?
Well, I definitely think that games that kind of pull on the heartstrings are the types of games that I grew up playing and being most attracted to. Yeah. So growing up in my household, like games were very looked down upon. Like my parents are honestly very anti-gaming. They portrayed gaming as like hyper violent. And so I kind of just stuck away from it as a kid until I realized that gaming can have such powerful stories. I remember the first game that I ever realized the true potential of this medium is The Last of Us, which is a game about a zombie apocalypse and the relationship between an older man and a young girl. From there, I really got into game narrative, specifically indie games. I realized how rich the stories can be and how these stories can really impact my life. So when it came to making my own games, the choice was clear. I wanted to make games that move people, that touch people, that impacted the world in a positive way, and that ushered in a new generation of gaming, games that are more inclusive, diverse, empathetic, a bigger but more welcoming community of games.
Dang, I love that you do not dream small, not in any way. But this is a big impact, and it's because you see the potential, right, in games to be able to be so profound. And you bravely decided to say, you know what, I'm going to add my own narrative into this space. Did you, what came first? Was it the story of like, here's an idea that I had, or is it the idea of I need to make a game that's going to tell stories? Story or game first?
For me, I've always known that I wanted to be a writer or a storyteller in some sense. In high school, I made movies, and when choosing what I wanted to major in college, I realized that a lot of my favorite stories, even though they're different mediums, what unites them is the power of language. So I studied English. In terms of what attracted me to games specifically and not making movies still or writing books is I'm just very intrigued by how games present player agency. So instead of reading a book where it's just very linear start to finish, in the game, you really embody the main character. You move as them, you attack as them, you make decisions as them. And I felt like that could immerse the player in an even deeper experience and allow them to empathize in a way that other mediums may not be able to achieve. So for me, storytelling always comes first, but games are currently my favorite medium to tell those stories.
I love that, especially as a player who has a tendency to run into walls. I feel like you don't ever see that in TV shows or but like that's me. I'm the klutz, I'm running into things. I'm getting lost every single time. The movie actors, they never seem to get lost in the same way I do as a minor plot point.
Same here.
Right. Like it's a new form, not even a new, but it is an immense form of just connection between you and the character. And you're absolutely right to define it as player agency, right? How we put ourselves into that. Now, when you're thinking about player agency, I also think about like some of the dangers behind that. Like when you start giving players options, how many different options do you give them? How much agency do you provide? And where do you begin to limit that? Like, do you allow them to get away with anything and everything? How many do you create within it? Not even to mention like the price that it goes associated with every option that you provide people. Like, do you provide consequences and pain? Like, what, as you diversify that action tree, you're trying to really give a lot more choices, but when do you decide what choices are right or wrong or what to include?
That's a great question. First of all, I should say that games, it's so great because it's so immersive, but where I think it can fall flat for different other mediums is that it just takes so much effort to even make one linear path in a game. So I think often what stops me and other game developers from truly having a more expansive story where you can do anything is scope. When you have one other choice, you have to create new art for it, new writing, new voiceover, programming, QA, and that is just a lot of effort and usually takes a lot of money. And I think that's why a common criticism of games is that, oh, my choices don't mean anything. Yeah. It's because the game developers literally don't have the resources to make the world as expansive as they want to. I also think what's really interesting is what choices are available to you. I think sometimes giving agency but then taking it away can be really interesting. So for example, like one of my favorite games is called Emily is Away, and it tells a story of a guy using an online chat room AIM to talk to this girl named Emily. And they have this kind of like flirtatious relationship back and forth. And suddenly things get very tense between them. And in the end, you're presented with a few choices. You can confront Emily and say like, hey, like, I miss you. What's going on? Why is your relationship so strained? Or it's like, ask about the weather. And obviously every single player is going to choose confront Emily and ask why your relationship is so strained. Yeah. And so you as the player, you type out, hey, Emily, I miss you. I don't know where things are going. Delete, 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 delete. Hey, how's the weather? It doesn't matter that you chose the first option. It forces you into the second option. Like I remember like playing that. I remember feeling like so betrayed as the player because it's like, why didn't you give me why did you even give me that choice to take it away? Yeah. But I think that's really what makes for like such powerful game design. For my games, one philosophy that I really like to use is that, at least in like the current game that I'm making and in my past game, it just tells a story about family, connection, forgiveness, self-discovery. And when you're telling such an emotional story, again, about forgiving yourself, forgiving those around you, forgiving your family, why are the verbs attack, kill, bomb, or whatever it is in normal combat games? Like the verbs should be something more graceful, like forgive, jump, explore, inspire. So for me, like I actually use obviously I can't do all the choices I want to do because of scope, but I think that also puts like like that limitation could lead to more powerful game design, because it's like, what choices do we want to have in there, and really making those choices count.
Yeah. Yes. I think that I like that you mentioned the importance of your narrative intervention. Like, here's where we want you to go. There's a choice of where you have free roam, and then there's points of where we say, this is the way you need to move forward, right? There's some direction in there. I'm going to share a much lighter example of that. I recently finished playing Colonel Sanders, I Love You, which is a dating sim.
Great game. Amazing game.
Great game. But it turns out either you romance him or the game fails you. Like, you're dead. Like, that's like, it ends and that's it. Or there's this pop quiz section and you can't win it. There's not ever like the right answer. And I played it, like I failed it like 4 or 5 times because in my brain, I'm determining like, there has to be a right answer. I know I can win this. I know I can get it correct. And you can't. It forces you to fail. And that was a very frustrating and surprisingly real experience. that I wasn't expecting from Colonel Sanders, right? But that's part of the challenge of it. And kind of want to pose for you, what do you think the ethics are when you're going through narrative, right? Like we could go through a variety of genres, but specifically when you have more of these role-playing games, how do you bring in that concept of what is ethically responsible of you as a writer for the emotions, the choices that you lay at your players' feet?
Yeah, so I definitely think this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when, like, for example, like when you're making a game about forgiveness, the verb should not be attack, kill, bomb, etc., right?
Yeah.
Um,
So do you
at least,
tree
like,
it out of like, here's the story and here's the appropriate verbs that go with that?
I think for me, well, okay, for my studio, like, I feel like environment or like atmosphere and story are like our core pillar, and everything is supposed to lead up to that. So I can talk a little bit about my next game. It's unannounced, but soon to be announced in 2024, I think. So in an early build of our game, again, this is we're also making a game about forgiveness and family, kind of similar to my first game. One of the things that you can do is you can reunite a baby lion to its mother lion, right? So when making a story game about forgiving yourself, your family, the action verbs are like reunite, make peace with, bring someone who's hurting to a mother figure. That's like the kind of quests and design that I try to think of with my game. So my next game is also very much inspired by Chinese mythology, and it has mythological creatures to it. And so I was very purposeful with what creatures to include and what storylines they have and how they maybe foil the story. So the action verbs would be to like learn from these mythological creatures, empathize with them, and take their learnings into your real life.
I am so excited about this game. I want to play it immediately right now. But I love how you're thinking about like, well, what's the appropriate options that we're giving here and associating with the lesson we want them to take away from it. And I think that's actually a really good guideline to narrow down that pathway, right? You're not giving them the option at any point to hit any of these creatures. You can't steal from them, right? There's like, these are the appropriate actions. The others are not actions that you should consider, right? That's that subtle omission that we have there.
Yeah, I was thinking about, okay, so I was actually talking in a stream yesterday about why do so many video games have combat? And I am not anti-combat at all in video games. Some of my favorite video games include combat. For example, Hades is a roguelike with a ton of combat, right? But when you're thinking about the type of story, like, I guess like my thought is like, why is it the go-to, right? I was having a game design conundrum. Right now, we're actually rethinking the genre of my game and thinking about ways that we can make it fresh.
Yeah.
And I think one of our animators was like, oh, what if we made it combat? And I kind of feel like that's like the default answer. Like, oh, you don't know what to do? Add combat. And I kind of want to challenge that notion. Combat does have a place in video games and can be very effective, but why is it the go-to?
I really think that's important when you're trying to think of games or stories that are focused on relatability. I will admit, I don't think I've ever been in a physical fight in my entire life.
Same.
Right? But navigating stories of forgiveness, where I seek forgiveness, where I give forgiveness, where I forgive myself, like that's much more common because I'm really great at mistakes, right? Like, okay, but that's so important that we forget about what we have in our own life, what we need, and what those stories can feed us in that space. So I like that you kind of challenge that. Yeah, we're not shaming fighting games, right? There's a place, there's a time. We love that in its own way, but it really stunts the opportunity for us to explore who we are character-wise if that's our only option. So would you ever in certain spaces consider fighting, or is that something that because you see the space and how kind of saturated it is that kind of the push to say at this point, that's a door we want to keep closed?
I think for my current game, we definitely are very against having violence. I would also consider like our game to fall into the wholesome game genre, which usually doesn't have violence. And because of its message, I feel like violence is kind of sends the opposite tone.
Yeah.
But I would consider violence or having combat in a future game. I think that for me, like, you know, this story is so much about self-reflection and not not letting your struggles, I guess, take over your life and fighting back against that, like fighting in your own way, that violence is not the answer. But I could see it in the future. It just depends on what game I make. There are some great games with combat, so I'm not saying no.
That's fair. That's fair. You're waiting for the right story, then it'll match. Fair. Now, I want to talk and kind of launch more onto, right, both your studio as a whole and what it sounds like even your second game, Asian American stories, right? So there's a choice, and I think it's interesting that you clarify it as being Asian American and not just Asian stories. Talk to me about that particular descriptor and how that changes your approach.
Yeah, so for me, representation in games has always been a little bit iffy. I mean, I think people know that like female representation in games has not always been satisfactory. But a lot of what made me so attracted to video games are some of the strong female protagonists that I related to. For example, playing games like Life is Strange, playing games like Night in the Woods, Grease, these all have female protagonists with really beautiful and moving stories. In terms of Asian American, I feel like the current Asian or Asian American representation in games is very limited to samurais, monks, or it's like very based in aesthetics. So like I feel like a lot of games they borrow from the cyberpunk aesthetic or like Asian aesthetics without any Asian developers on the story or telling any Asian narrative. It's really just like, oh, it looks cool and exotic. So for my studio, we really wanted to like have that place. I think our games really can appeal to the Asian American audience. Asian Americans are finally seeing their voice in media with movies like Everything Ever All at Once and books like Crying in H Mart. And I feel like games is like that, you know, movies, TV shows, books. I feel like games kind of needs to like come next. And that's why I'm really hoping that Soldering Studio can fill that void. But at the same time, I feel like games like mine could have a lot of appeal in China. For example, like I'm a first generation immigrant. I have family in China, and I'm sure a lot of Chinese people in China have that dynamic where they have family members abroad. And I feel like this can also be my games can allow them to understand the struggles that their family members are going through, while also appreciating like some actual like Chinese representation. Since my game has Chinese mythology, which is like Asian, not Asian American. I just feel like Asians and Asian Americans, we are a very untapped market in games, and specifically modern representation. So that's the void that I'm trying to fill.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the modern representation, and even throughout the word, like we're seen as exotic, because I mean that's only from a very Western perspective.
Yes. It's not actually, I'm saying it from the Western perspective. Exotic. It's not actually.
And I love, because you're absolutely right at that. Like when we're talking about here in the United States, and we're talking about going to market, and we're talking about players, right? They view it oftentimes, or is framed by some even AAA studios as this is exotic. We're gonna give them this really exotic look. We're gonna go with like the samurai because it looks different. It looks strange. It's different. But if you go to anywhere else in the world, especially Asia, like this is not exotic, right? It's not anything that's new or fresh. And again, I think you're absolutely right. No matter where you go, it's that missing modernization that we really want to crave. I'm glad that you do make the distinction, but also show that there's still valuable connection between Asian and Asian American, right? As we're starting to see more media come out, both in TV shows, video games, books, movies, lesser still in video games, right? But we're seeing it kind of sometimes just straight categorized only as Asian and not separated. And it can blur the conversations of identity, of belonging, and what we share in that. So for you in this particular space, like how do you bring in those conversations of separating and also combining, right? Like I know you mentioned like recognizing the mythology and bringing it in. I'd like to explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, so for this, I can talk about A Taste of the Past, which is the first game that I made. So in the game, it's about a young girl overcoming the loss of her mother through cooking Chinese food. And the game talks about two ways that the main character feels isolated from her classmates. In one sense, she's isolated from her classmates because she's a young girl who's had a huge loss in her family. Her classmates probably haven't experienced that loss, and so she feels isolated because she's had this experience that they don't have. And on one hand, she also feels isolated from her classmates because she's Asian and they may not understand that. But then on the other hand, the third hand, she's Asian and she feels isolated from being Asian because her mother was her connection to her heritage. And without her mother, who am I? Am I Asian? Am I not? What is my identity in this world? And I think that that's a big conflict that a lot of us have a lot of like Asian Americans have going into college and just growing up and being without their families, having ancestors in China, in America. So in our game, we talk a lot about like that cultural dissonance that happens when she loses her mom. So one example of this is, her mom cooks all the food in the house, right? But now that her mom's gone, she has to shop for her own groceries or her own snacks. But she's in this Asian grocery store and she feels alone because she doesn't usually go here. Everyone else is speaking in Chinese and she doesn't know what brand of udon to buy or what is their exact brand of, X to buy. And she's standing here and she's very confused. She still wants to bring her Chinese heritage to her family. One of the big elements of A Taste of the Past is that the journey is about May, the main character, making longevity noodles, which is a traditional Chinese dish that you eat on your birthday. So it's her birthday now, and she wants to make these noodles, but she doesn't know how to get the ingredients. And she doesn't feel comfortable asking her dad. She doesn't feel comfortable asking the Asians in the store because she feels like she's an outsider. What does she do, right? So I think that's the way that I balance, it's a very Asian American experience, but it's about how we want to be more Asian and yet we somehow also want to be more white. We just want to be part of one group, but we are part of neither.
Yes. As we feel torn. I find myself actually tearing up hearing these stories because it's incredibly relatable in so many ways. I remember when I go with my dad to different places, I'll get different menus. One is when I'm with him, I get the Chinese menu. When I'm by myself, I get the English menu. I went to a Chinese grocery store and I just picked up dark soy sauce and a woman stopped me. She's like, "Do you know what that's used for?" And like, it's never malicious, but it's one of those things, again, that makes you feel like an outsider without your family connection there to tie you to it, that you don't have it on your own. And that identity and that cultural connection is hard to foster, hard to feel like you can be a part of it. And there's these weird rules that sometimes pop up and say, here's what it takes to count or be identified as Asian or Spanish or whatever culture you want to fit in at this point. So I love that even though it focuses on this, it really is relatable to many people who are trying to find any cultural connection.
Yeah, so in the spoilers for A Taste of the Past. It's a very short game and it's free, so I think it's fine to say spoilers for my own game. But in the final scene, May has a monologue about how she goes to this Asian grocery store and she doesn't know what brand of udon to buy, but next to her, she sees a mother buying udon for her daughter, and the mom goes like, "Oh, like this brand of udon is my favorite." And to her, it feels like, even though I don't have like my like actual mother there, like I can still borrow from, I guess, like, these Asian aunties at the grocery store, and she can still feel that motherly presence in these cultural spaces.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now, for this, like, where did you find an inspiration for a story like that? Did you draw upon your own experiences, those that you've heard from friends, of family members, embedded in this story?
Yeah, so I should first say that, like, A Taste of the Past is kind of a mistake. So
you what? No, wait. Okay. Okay, you have to clarify. Obviously.
Okay, so this game, so my next game is like very ambitious, right? Like I'm trying to get funding for it. It's going to be a multi-year project. But A Taste of the Past, about 95% of the game was made in 3 days for a game jam. I never knew that I was going to make A Taste of the Past before going into it. I just put it on Steam and then it blew up. Did not realize that. But for the game jam, a game jam is it's like a hackathon. You make a game from scratch in this case 3 days into a theme. And a few days before the jam, they put out a list of themes, and I thought, okay, like I'm gonna actually start brainstorming some ideas for each theme. And so a ton of the themes I'd written a ton of content for. Oh, this is gonna be a great idea. And then the theme that was chosen, Deeper and Deeper, I had one sentence. I think I wrote or someone on my team wrote, a girl on a train, and each train goes deeper and deeper in time. But that was one of my least favorite themes. And so I remember when the game jam started and that was the theme, I was like, oh no, I'm gonna make such a terrible game. But it ended up working out. I made a Taste of the Past, which I never would have made had it not been that theme. So I am very actually thankful that theme came to be.
Okay, I love that. I think that's hilarious. But I think it also shows like you got to put yourself in creative spaces that would challenge you. That's amazing. Honestly, when I hear that prompt, that sounds horrifying. So I can see like, where do we go for this? What do we?
Yes. So like in terms of the prep for the game, there was none. So I wasn't really thinking about my family and all these deep themes. I just thought, oh God, I have this theme that I don't really like. I gotta do something with it. But as we obviously, as the game jam progressed, I started thinking a bit more deeply into making it a good game.
We were kind of committed at this point.
Like, yeah, I was committed. And especially, obviously, so okay, 95% of the game is still in the game jam forum. You can actually play the game jam version online if you want to. You'll see it's very, very similar.
Yeah.
But I was like, I gotta get in this this different mind space very quickly. For me, this game was very largely inspired by the relationship I have with my mother and my grandmother. So growing up, my grandmother kind of took care of me. Both of my parents work. So my grandma would send me home from school. She'd make me afternoon snacks. She would, talk to me about my day. And a big reason why we connect is through food. For example, traditions like we would make dumplings every single Sunday and I'd help the family out. And that would kind of be our bonding time. So I really wanted to capture that bond through food. And then on the other hand, May has a very complicated relationship with her mother. She, in the beginning of the game, doesn't realize all the things that her mother has done for her. And she feels betrayed by her mother dying, even though obviously her mother had no choice. It kind of just feels like, our relationship has soured over the years and now you're committing the ultimate act of betrayal by leaving me. But by the end of the game, she realizes that in Asian culture and with her mother, they express love through different ways, not in Western ways like saying, I love you or like outward affection, but things like, always making sure you have your favorite snacks when you get home, driving you to school, making sure you're on top of your art class, etc. And that's a very similar relationship I have with my own mother. I feel like we're not the type to say I love you. We're not the type to like openly appreciate each other, but we're the type where it's like, oh, my mom will go to the supermarket and buy my favorite snack. She'll go to the mall and hear that I need new shirts, and so she'll get some on the way home. And so like I was very intrigued in that different form of love and really thought that could be expressed well through a game. So in my game, it's a half narrative, half cooking game. Half narrative because you're in a train that goes deeper and deeper in time and you talk to your ancestors, and half cooking because it's you make longevity noodles, which is the dish for your birthday as the train continues, right? Aww. And in the very beginning, the game shows you how to do a certain step, right? So for example, you got to boil the water at a specific temperature. And so it'll give you directions in the beginning. But as each mini game progresses, the instructions disappear, almost like your mother teaching you. And then now that she's gone, you have to blossom and learn on your own.
Oh man, this is hard. I love this.
Emotionally intense game, so beware.
Oh, okay. All right. I should probably take my contacts out tonight when I play this. No, I love this. Okay, one clear spoiler, or at least piece of information I need to know going in is, do you at least by the end of this tell us how to make the noodles, right? Like, do we have a recipe? Do we get the recipe by the end? Because then I might want to. I feel like it'd be something like to heal from this. I'd be like, then I need to actually go make the noodles for myself.
Okay, we don't have like the exact recipe, but it does take you to like the steps.
Okay.
So like cutting the vegetables, boiling the water, like mixing soy sauce in the noodles, so you have somewhat of an idea.
Okay. Eventually, you all need to post your favorite recipe version of it so that way we can follow this. A recipe book would be great to accompany this game.
Something we were considering was doing a stream where we made like longevity noodles with me and like my team.
Yeah.
But this year we actually decided to do dumplings instead because it's Chinese New Year. So
even better. Listen, I need a good dumpling recipe. I tried to make some and mine did not come out great. I went and bought some.
They really are a labor of love because they take forever to make. Like we were cooking for hours.
Yes, it's so much effort.
It's so hard.
Oh no. Or I tried to make bao buns and like my cloud bread is not the same texture.
Oh yeah, I never made bao buns.
Oh.
We're more ambitious than I am.
Well, they didn't turn out right, so the ambition is still it's still working. But you're absolutely right of like how I love like we can just quickly talk about food because you're right. Food is such an emotional experience. The making of it, the enjoying of it, who we share it with, right? It's something that easily pulls at those heartstrings. So I see all of this coming together so beautifully. I can see why this is a successful piece that people get attached to because you found these beautiful variables that go together perfectly. Talk about a recipe. It seems you figured this out, which is impressive because this was y'all's first game as a studio.
Yeah, and it was a game we made in 3 days. So I was very surprised that it did so well.
That's kind of insane. Actually, it's not kind. It is. It's insane that you were able to put together something so quickly because the process of, well, even just finding like, how do we find enough people to put together that we can create and hopefully put out a game together, right? Like, so find a team, find people that are going to have time, not only that want to be a part of it, that have time to be a part of it, to complete it on deadlines that hopefully everyone can keep up with on top of other work that they might be doing. And then to have a vision and sharing that vision with the same people that we have, and then being able to execute. Like, that list is so detailed and hard. What do you think helps with the team at Sondering Studio to be so effective, especially with this first launch game, to have the success and such a beautiful tale and beautiful visuals that you all have? What made that work?
I think, okay, like I actually feel like I have very strong thoughts about the team of Sondering Studio. So I was the one that founded the studio, right? So every single person that joined the team, like I chose them to be brought on. And for me, like a lot of us, so there's 3 leads. It's me, Peter, and Caroline, and we all met at UCLA. Peter's the programmer, Caroline does art direction.
Yeah.
And for me, like this was before I even decided to start a studio. Whenever I work in teams, I'm kind of like the pep talk, the visionary, the elevator, I guess, of the team. So yeah, this was like it started as just us being students at the game development club, and we'd make these small projects here and there. And I remember I was like, we should make a Twitter for the games that we make, just so people online can hear them. UCLA, the game dev scene is very small. At USC, this is probably like every single day, but UCLA, when I started, there was 20 people in a cramped classroom, and that was the whole game dev of UCLA.
Easy pickings then, right?
Right. And for me, like a big thing is like whenever I work, I realize that it's really hard to have teammates that you like. And so if I have a good teammate, I will do anything in my power to keep them. So for example, like there's this guy named Richard who I've worked with since the beginning of like my game dev journey. And like he works now at Sondering Studio. And in the first year of us making a game, I was like, you are the most valuable teammate ever. You bring so much to this team. And so that next year in school, I was like, I wanted to be a team lead, and I wanted him to apply to be on my team.
Yeah.
And I straight up was like, what will get you to apply to be my team? And he's like, oh, well, I kind of want to make this game. I was like, I'm making the game that you want me to make. So I think a lot of it's, for me, it's like, I'm like definitely willing to sacrifice to get the right people on my team. Mm-hmm. And when they're there, I'm like, I tell them, I'm like, I want you on the next team. Mm-hmm. Like, let's build this thing together. For example, like A Taste of the Past, it really could have just ended as a game jam that people liked, right? Yeah. But I was like, no, like you guys are all so talented. The work you put in this was amazing. There's some serious potential. Let's put it on Steam. Oh, it's doing well on Steam. What if we all just started a game studio together? Like I'm like very much like, I see the future, okay? Like manifestation type. And so, you know, every time I worked with someone great, I made sure that they stuck with me. I like literally was like, what can I do to have us continue working together?
Yeah.
I've always been very strong about where I see my studio, where I see the future of our games. So you kind of know immediately like whether you want to join me or not. I make it very, very clear like the values of the studio and what types of game you want to make and what type of collaboration that I look for in team members. And I've honestly just been like so grateful to meet the people on my team. They are so talented. Every single day, I'm like, how do I get to work with these people who are just like, why are they crazy enough to join me for this crazy ride? But yeah, they're just amazing. I don't even know if this really answered your question. I just want to talk about how great they are.
Yes and no. Like, I think we saw it is what it was, is that you support your team, you find people that match your energy, and then you do all that you can to be like, yes, let's do it. Let's provide this vision. You give them the inspiration, that direction, and it pulls everyone together. You're this glue, right? And that's such an important take, because people, especially creatives, when we have our ideas, it's easy for us to want to go in our own direction. To be like, well, here's my vision of it. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's where I want to go with it. Here's what I want to do. And you found a way to really pull everyone together. You are engaging. I love this. Yeah, I'm even seeing in chat, like, love your energy. It's so enticing, but that's because you know what you want to do. I think a lot of people, when they're starting out in a space, go, well, what do I want to do in this space? Well, I just want to try different things. How did you know, like, when was the right time that, okay, well, I know there might be a bit of a spoiler to say that starting a studio was an interesting choice. But at what point were you like, yes, we need to commit. Let's do the studio. Let's make Sondering Studio a real thing. We're going to start putting dedicated effort behind it. We're going to give ourselves a title. We're going to start, vying, hopefully for, support in a variety of spaces, communities, gamers. What made you say, yeah, this is it. It's time.
Delusion. That's the first one. But other things that led me to this, well, I should say Sondering Studio, it actually first started off as a name just to release my games under.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, it'd be awkward because like let's say there's like 6 people under a game to be like Emily Pitcher, Peter Satarjo, Caroline Wang, and like all those names. I was like, we should have a unified name to release these games under. So Sondering is the name that I came up with. It comes from the word sonder. It means the realization that every passerby has their own unique backstory and life and, complexity of their own. I really love the word sonder because it really encapsulates the vibe of my game. Yeah. So I feel like, especially in A Taste of the Past, like May is not a unique person. She goes through struggles just like you and me, but through those very ordinary struggles, she learns extraordinary life lessons. And that's very much the spirit that Sondering Studio embodies, taking people who may not be the strongest one in the room, the brightest, or, whatever it is. They're not the most of anything in the room, but they can go on epic adventures, learn so much about themselves, and have these like very deep introspective experiences.
I love that.
That's kind of like the formation of Sondering. And yeah, so I was, as time went on, I realized like, oh, like there's some game types I really, really like working with. So Richard was one of them. Caroline was one of them. It's actually so funny. Like Caroline and I almost didn't meet. I was a team lead at the game dev studio, and she's a design major. And there was a posting in the newsletter being like, hey, this club is looking for designers. And so if it weren't in the newsletter, she wouldn't have joined. And also she joined very late. So they could have also said no to allowing her in. And then also when they allowed her in, she put my game as the #1 game she wanted to work on. So like the stars aligned for us to work together. But yeah, I was slowly collecting people that I just felt like I really liked working with, and I wanted to work with them together. And I think at one point I realized like the game is very important, but it's at this point, it's so much more than just the game. It's these people. I want to make a game with these people. I don't really want to work for, Call of Duty, right? Mm-hmm. And make a game that I may not be as passionate about. Yeah. Like I feel like there's so much potential. We have this bright energy. We have a very strong sense of storytelling. Like this is the team that I want to go with. And that's what made me realize, like, okay, the only way for us to really come together is for us to start a studio. Let's just give this a try, right? So yeah, with A Taste of the Past came out, people started talking about our game, and I was extremely fortunate. So when A Taste of the Past came out, almost right after, I started brainstorming what my next game is going to be, and then I spoke at a conference called Game Devs of Color Expo, and Xbox reached out to me. They're like, "Would you like to bring A Taste of the Past to Xbox?" And I said no. We made it into a game. It's spaghetti code. No one wants to see it on Xbox, okay? But I was like, I have this new game that maybe you're interested in. And that's when they told me that they had this pilot program. It was not public. It's public now, so I can talk very openly about it, called the Developer Acceleration Program. And essentially, it's to support like promising developers making diverse games. Yeah. So my studio ended up being one of the very first games in that pilot program. And like that gave us the resources to get more people on our team and really gave us the motivation to be like, I don't care that, this is a very rocky path. Mm-hmm. We have a greater purpose out there. I see real potential in this. Like, let's just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Make it happen. You see a vision, you find the right thing. Honestly, when you first said no, I mean, I know I looked absolutely shocked, to say the least, but that's because you knew what was going to be right for your team. You have to make the right choices, and finding the one that's going to give you support to bring more people on to help support the team members that you do have. That's such the right choice. That's the direction that you wanted to go and has helped you all flourish, and to the point where you're like, let's think about our second game now. Where can we continue from this? And I hope more organizations are doing what Xbox had offered, right? Of saying, how do we support more individuals in creating cool, fresh stories? How do we bring more of those games so that way it isn't just the same iteration of a story that we've seen before?
Yeah. Xbox has been an amazing business partner. Yeah. And also, okay, with A Taste of the Past, like, we were done with A Taste of the Past. We were sick of A Taste of the Past. We did not want to do an Xbox port.
We're done. We can't do it anymore. Fair. You made that breathing point. Yeah. I want to call out, because I think chat really made this clear, that it sounds like the secret ingredient to knowing when to start your studio is delusion.
Yes.
That seems to be the core thing of like, yes, just dream bigger, pretend that there's no challenges, we can do it, and you go for it. Are you glad that you did? Do you regret any of it? Has that delusion, even though it's worn off, do you still believe in the choices you've made?
Of course, I would never give up my studio, but that doesn't mean that starting the studio it's been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I've achieved more than I ever dreamed of, but I've also been hindered in ways that have kind of broken my heart too. I think, so as I said before we started this podcast, when people ask me, should I start a studio? What do I need to start a studio? My answer is don't do it. And my real answer is that actually don't do it. But the thing is, like, I think in order for you to have a successful studio, you need to hear the words "don't do it" and be like, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyways.
Push through, right? You got to believe in yourself at the end of the day. You've got a vision, you've got something new, and you see that there's a space on that amidst all the other game titles.
Yeah, and I don't even mean this to be like gatekeeping at all, but like actually this shit was so much harder than I thought. I watched Indie Game the Movie, which touches upon, I think this is like a great story for like if you want to do a game studio, right? Yeah. So I watched this movie called Indie Game the Movie, and it talks about 3 indie darlings and how their game came to be. These 3 games were huge successes, by the way. Yeah. And it really does not shy away from how hard it was to make those games. You need to watch that documentary and realize that this documentary focused on 3 massive success stories. For these 3 massive success stories, there's thousands of failures of people who went through the same struggles but did nothing for their game, right? And you need to say, like, I see these horrors and I'm willing to do it even if my game is a huge failure. There is this Mike Bithell is a very famous game developer. He made this platformer called Thomas Is Not Alone. And he spent years of his life slaving away to make this platformer. And in the first week that it came out, it had 500 copies. which is not good.
Yeah.
The game is now very successful, but it didn't have a good launch, right? And he didn't care that it didn't do well. He was like, I'm proud of the fact that I made that and those 500 people enjoyed that game. You need to have that mindset where it's like, you're going to give up things in your life. You can make way more money in other fields than doing game development. You could have way better work-life balance doing anything else. This could ruin your friendships. This is something that's really not talked about enough. Game development ruins friendships. Not mine, but I have so many stories I heard about game developers. They think they're going to make a hit game, and they have these huge arguments about business, design. They cannot quell these arguments, and then they're never friends again. Indie Game the movie actually delves into one of these relationships and how a broken friendship also potentially ruins the business. Essentially, your quality of life could be so much better if you don't do this, right? So you need to essentially like look at that and be like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyways.
Dang.
And another thing is like you have to love more than just the act of making games. When I made the studio, I thought, oh, the biggest challenge is going to be making the game. Oh, no. The biggest challenge is lawyers, funding, paying a lot of money to go to these expensive conferences and network. There is just so much that goes into running this studio, paying your taxes, paying a lot of money for an accountant to do your taxes. Like there's just so much business to it that has absolutely nothing to do with making the game. The business is not fun. So you needed to like making the game enough that you're willing to do all of the crap that is awful. And you might be doing the stuff that you don't want to do for years before you even start making your game, because that's just kind of how the business is.
Yeah. I love your bluntness around this because it's so important. The gaming industry can often be glamorized, that it's, fun and cool and you get to make really cool things. And then, of course, the fans will always love you and you don't get any negative comment and everyone's going to buy it and you'll have all the money and then that'll be enough money to make your next game, right? Like, and everyone gets along because if you actually finish your game, right? Because that's another challenge in and of itself. Yeah. If you finish your game, then that's because all of your developers and team got along and they're very happy with the output as well. And right, there's a fantasy that we're imagining.
There is a fantasy. People see Stardew Valley and think, that's the indie dev life.
Yeah.
That is, and Stardew Valley, like, even though it's such a success story, people don't even realize what went into it. To make the game, Concerned Ape, he spent 7 years on it, and his girlfriend financed his life while making the game.
Yeah.
He didn't work. So, like, yeah, it's also a very unique predicament to be in, right? To not be able, like, you don't need a job. I think he also maybe worked, he had either no job, and then eventually he was like, oh, I'm going to work part-time at a movie theater, right? Yeah. So again, like, his girlfriend was financing his life. Like, most people don't have that luxury.
Would she like to finance my life? Like, hello? But that's the next challenge of, like, where do we find benefactors? Where do we continue to find support? Because at the end of the day, like, we love that, like, I can download your game for free and I love that. I can hop on Steam and I can play it. But for consumers, gamers, like even like me, like at the end of the day, that doesn't help support you then making the next game. And while it's great that you make that so accessible, people can enjoy the story and embrace it. Like, thinking of revenue options is so important. And I know people are getting riffs like, well, now they're, everything's behind DLC or every skin is extra. But it's because games are figuring out, like, how do we survive? How do we make sure that we can make the next game?
Games are not as profitable as people think that they are. You look at companies like Riot or Blizzard and you think, oh, they got fat pockets. Yeah. But the majority of developers, like, especially indie game developers, like, it's not like that.
Yeah.
I remember... so I read this book called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. It's about how certain games are made. And it was talking about Shovel Knight, which is an indie darling. Universally revered as a great indie game, successful monetarily, critics-wise, fans love it, right?
Yeah.
And they had a Kickstarter for the game, and that Kickstarter allowed them a certain amount of runway. Let's just say a year and a half. I don't remember the exact, right? Year and a half passed. And they're like, oh, shit. I can't release the game. Like, it's just not ready yet.
Yeah.
But like, what do we do? They tried everything they could to get a publisher for the game, to get more funding for the game, but it just was falling through. And they now have accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from people on Kickstarter, they can't just not deliver either. And one of the main developers, had a pregnant wife. And they all sat together and they're like, let's just work for no pay for 6 months. They were eating ramen. They could not survive. And then what if that game failed? Right. So I think that's like, I really, really think about this. Like in the development of Cuphead, the developers had to remortgage their houses and they had to ask their parents for money to survive because they could not continue because they didn't have enough money with their game. It's very unfortunate that the games market is like this. I think the big thing is that even though games are the most profitable medium, it makes more money than movies, music, radio, a bunch of industries combined. It also just takes so much more money to create. This is definitely a struggle that I'm facing right now as I'm trying to get funding for my studio. This is a really difficult funding market. If you just search up the game industry, all you hear about are mass layoffs. A lot of game publishers have had really difficult past year. And, I just want to pay my team a livable wage. And it's really disheartening when I go to these funding meetings, I present my budget, and they're like, it's too much. You need to minus like $500,000. And it's like, I don't have $500,000 to minus. Like, This is just me trying to pay everyone a fair salary. Like I don't like, the only way for me to shave it off, I guess, is to make a different game maybe, or just to like live in poverty. Like, it's just very, very hard.
They're tough stories to hear. And they're not funny stories to hear, to be honest, right? Like, cause it really, it can sometimes add a new light, not a bad light, but an important light for us to understand when we play these games, the struggles that it goes through to make something like that, to make something, a game that we love. And especially in the game genres that you're making, narrative, where there are choices and it's stories. Like, it's not just, here's a template, basic fighting, we can replicate this in as many editions as possible. You're creating a lot of work, and that is more expensive. Not all games require the same price point. All are still expensive, but certain ones are definitely a few extra more dollar signs in that challenge of what you're creating.
Yeah, I mean, okay, this is something that I think about a lot, actually. Okay, so there's this game called Hades. It's a very, very good game. I'm gonna go looking it up later. So Hades is $25 if you want to buy it, right?
Yeah.
And
it blew up when it came out. People were going wild.
It's so successful.
Yeah.
Supergiant is awesome. I know like some of the developers there. They're literally like the best people ever. But Greg Kasavin, who's the writer of Hades, said that if you combine all of the dialogue in Hades, because also there's a lot of branches, it's 300,000 words. So books are typically 80,000 words, right? So it is more than 3 novels. It's like 3.5 novels, right? In a game, and it's $25. And you can easily buy a book for $20 off Barnes and Noble, right? And this game not only just has 300,000 words, it's like amazing art, animation, voiceover. Like, it has so much, right? And so like I think about it, like that's actually an amazing deal for $25. Yes. And yet like I see, for example, like there are games that are like, maybe a couple hours long and they're $15, and people are like, oh, this is such a scam. Like, it's too expensive. But it's like, you watch a movie for what, $15? That's an hour and a half. You buy a book that's 80,000 words, that's $20. And yet, like, I don't like, I guess for me, like, I personally see a disconnect with the outrage for game prices. I do understand that there are shady tactics used in games sometimes. But like, for me, like, I will never criticize the cost of like a premium game by like indie game developers. Like, I know how hard that is.
They earned that dollar, and it's still probably not the real price that they should be charging on top of it. Like, they're lowering it so that way it'll be more accessible to more people for it, hoping more people buy it. That is crazy. I'll be honest, I had never heard that comparison of word count, and that is so illuminating. 300,000 in Hades in a book. 80. Like, that is insane. That is insane. And that's just the script. That doesn't talk about any of the rest of it.
Anything else, right?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. I think people often forget that. It makes me think of like, even when you said like your parents and their approach to it, it's because video games has this stereotype because it's fun that it's easy.
Making indie games, okay, I have this like phrase that I like to use,
Yeah.
joyful suffering. Like it's so bad, but I somehow like it at the same time.
Joyful suffering.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I buy it. I buy it. That is a key phrase I'm going to be taking away with me today. Joyful suffering. Honestly, this is so important because it's key to have these conversations of what things cost. Both, even if we never go on to the side, like for many of our listeners, our players out here, if you never go to be on the flip side of making games, it gives more empathy and understanding behind those price points. It gives more
Mhm.
appreciation when you see the names and hear from the people that are behind it making it and how they put their heart into it. It changes the way that you approach. Yes, joyful suffering and sondering. You're giving us
Yeah.
beautiful vocabulary today. Yes, I love it. Um, this is this is so good. I want us to take a small little break here because we're about at the hour mark, and I love what we do. I want us to come back and I want to talk more about your journey as you all have grown. A little bit more of like what people don't understand. Let's break more of these barriers of not necessarily destroying the fantasy, but illuminating what this is really like. You know, you
Mhm.
mentioned like the lawyers, the business side. I want us to be able to understand what you've gone through to continue to allow us to sympathize and to appreciate all of those efforts. And for people who are considering starting their own studio right now,
Yeah.
with as you mentioned, right, there's a lot of people that don't have a studio home right now. A lot of AAA companies, we're downsizing. Like people go, they might be looking at options. What does it take? What are the challenges? So at least if you know that it's difficult, you have an idea of some of what you're gonna
Yeah.
go through hurdle wise. The delusion can still stay, but at least you might be better prepared for it. All right, Emily, I'm going to let you take your 5 minute break. I'm going to switch over real quick to a full segment here as we talk about our Thunder Picks pick segment. So I'm going to switch this on real quick as we talk about this. And this is important, right? Here we are, and we're talking about that special time of the week again where we shine the spotlight on our amazing, our fantastic talent within our community here at the Gamers. So yes, it's our Pink Picks winner announcement. Remember, each week we've seen an incredible show of talent and spirit from femme presenting gamers who aren't just playing games. They're changing the game. And today we have another amazing gamer who has made her mark. And remember, you can always hop over to Instagram and nominate individuals. Right? There's more details over on the gamer's Instagram account if you want to have somebody who's nominated. So first of all, a huge thank you to everyone who did participate and send in your nominations. Keep them coming. It's your support that makes Pink Picks, powered by Thunderpick, not just possible, but a powerful movement towards inclusivity and recognition in gaming. So, now, the moment we've been waiting for. Big fireworks all around. Imagine it because I don't have that production capability, so believe it. This week's Pink Picks winner is Firewall Fox. Congratulations! Let's talk a little bit about why Firewall Fox is taking home this honor. Firewall Fox is an IT TikToker and streamer. She's been streaming a little over a year and mostly chats. She is also the Gamers 2024 Rising Star of the Year, and you can stay connected with her on Twitter or X at Firewall Fox 100. And for being such an incredible part of our community, Firewall Fox will receive a swag bag from Thunderpick, packed with all the essentials any gamer could dream of. We're talking travel gear, high-tech gadgets, and exclusive gaming gear. So all of those amazing goodies that we love to see at the end of the day. So make sure, hop on over to Twitter and give them a follow. So once again, remember, that when you are nominating amazing individuals, all you have to do is hop over to Instagram. This is a campaign that is all about celebrating and supporting our peers. Keep those nominations coming in for next week's Pink Picks, and let's continue to lift each other up in this incredible gaming journey. All right, we'll take our 5 minute break, and we'll see you all soon. friends, we are back from our break. We're here with the amazing Sondering Emily from Sondering Studio, and we're having some amazing conversations. We're actually going to pull a question from chat that popped up right before we hopped over to break, and this comes from Nachos Dimension. Right, how do you market your business when your target consumer is another business, especially when it's a studio that manages their own team and taking on contract work? And I think that's a really interesting thing when we talk about like how businesses, like how you've done with Xbox or how you might work with other studios to collaborate, any of those partnership opportunities. How do you navigate those particular spaces?
Yeah, so firstly, the way that I target to consumers and target other businesses is very, very different. But in specifically, like how I manage my business relations, I was very fortunate that Xbox reached out to me. But for this next leg of Sondering Studio, we definitely have to seek external partners. And so, how does one even go about that? The answer is really not fun, but it's the honest truth. If you want to get funding for your studio, or let's say you want to partner with PlayStation and release your game on the PS5, how do you do those things, right? A lot of it is paying for very expensive conferences such as DICE, Game Dev Conference, Gamescom, which are not cheap to go to, very expensive tickets, very expensive to fly there. Setting up business meetings. The way that you do that is going on LinkedIn and trying to find people's contact. Also, some people are very generous and they've put together like master lists of game dev contacts. So going through there and seeing what works for you. And then another one is making a presentation about your game, or what's called a pitch deck. So I have a pitch deck for my next game, and includes things like who is my main character, my budget, my production timeline, my game loop, my elevator pitch, my marketing plan, all of the like nitty gritty details about what my game is and my business plan for my game. That is like the 3 steps. So like prepare a pitch deck for your game and your studio. Try to network with people, but a lot of that networking is done at very expensive conferences. These business partners, they're getting 1 million emails per day. So unfortunately, one of the better ways to stand out is to go to these in-person events. Mm-hmm. I think that's like what I meant by like, running a game studio is so hard, because like none of this involves making a game. It's like pleasing investors and having like pitch conversations and hearing really difficult no's. So that's how I go about it. I also recognize that like I am not the most likely person to get funding. Number one, I'm making a social impact game, which doesn't really read dollar signs to investors. And number two, if you read like any statistic about women getting funding in games, it is very abysmal. There was an article released about VC funding to games projects. So first of all, obviously men raised way more money than women in terms of games funding. But even if we were to spread it evenly, so, the amount of funding given to men divided by number of companies or number of men, right? Mm-hmm. Each man would have raised $18 million if we divided it evenly. Each woman, which there were only 5, raised $200,000.
Whoa.
So it's the difference of $18 million and $200,000, right? So I think like another strategy that I use, because I understand that this is a barrier I have to overcome as a woman. Also, like that statistic is not even including like people of color, like that. It's just man versus woman, right?
Yeah.
So like for me, actually, it's very important that I seek out traditional success. So for me, it's things like being in Forbes 30 under 30, being featured in the Game Awards. I think a lot of developers might look down on me, or just people in general might be like, why do you seek this, right? But it's like, it's what I need to do to make myself a serious candidate to these investors. It's an unfortunate truth, but it is what it is. I gotta do what I gotta do to make my dreams happen. And sometimes it's going for things like Forbes 30 under 30, even though a lot of people make fun of it.
I think it's amazing, because you're right. When you're on Forbes 30 under 30, right? Like it's not for every audience. It's to a specific audience to show that you should be taken seriously, right? That's the argument. When you apply and you fill out the forms and put your nominations in for different game awards, it's not necessarily like you don't need the awards, like, and you're proud of your game, but you're using it as a way to make sure others are seeing it so that way you can get funding. And I think people forget how important things like that are. It's not just enough to have a lot of Steam reviews, right?
Right.
Which is great, and
Yeah.
you should still offer, right? Like, it's good to have positive of those, but going in and supporting your games in ways that help elevate their story is so important. And I'm glad you mentioned it's like not being as fun, because yeah, we think of, all of this extra little work, these details, as difficult. And I gotta ask, especially hearing that number, it's appalling, of the discrepancy between men and women. Did it ever tempt you to put a, a man from your studio to ask for money?
Honestly, that's really interesting. I think okay, so again, I have heard some devastating no's.
I mean, I hate asking that question, but like when you need money, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I took a risk when starting Soldering Studio in
Yeah.
terms of like the way that we market ourselves.
Yeah.
So I am kind of the face of Soldering Studio, even though my team members put so much effort into the game.
Mhm.
Are not public people. Like they don't like to be on social media. But like social media is a very necessary part at this point of marketing your game and getting your name out there. So I made the decision to market us as not just like a studio, like Sondering Studio and running corporate accounts, but running it more like, oh, Emily. That's why my username is Sondering Emily, not like Sondering Studio, right?
Yeah.
And I think that way people can have a more personal approach to our studio and relate to me as a human being and not as like a corporate entity.
Mhm.
And so like with that, I cannot be a man because like all of our socials is like, hi, Emily is going to be doing this.
Yeah.
All my Instagram has my face in it. But like, it definitely does make me wonder, like, because for me to say like, oh, I'm getting no's because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
Like I can already see like so many like angry gamers being like, that's a horrible opinion. No, it's because you suck.
Yeah.
But like, it is really hard to know because obviously I think there's a lot of reasons I might be hearing no. Maybe they just don't like my game. The funding market's really bad, etc. But like there are these like factors that are impossible to deny. Like when you hear that stat about female versus male founders and getting VC funding, it's really sad to hear.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much that is playing a role, although it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see it in the bigger picture. You'll just never hear it in the stories because no one's going to be direct, like, yeah, we didn't go with you because we don't believe in women leading this company. Like, no, at least no one's going to publicly say it. Maybe in some separate Slack channel that eventually might get leaked around the world. But I think that's part of these challenges. And I appreciate your honesty in saying that you've heard no's, right? Because that's hard to hear. I'm going to tack off a question here in chat. Has it ever been tempted to you to ever change anything if some of those no's were contingent on, well, have you considered this? If you did this change, or if you would let us buy this?
Yes. So that is actually something that I am going through right now. The game genre that my game is currently is a narrative platformer.
Yeah.
And I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of investors, that they don't like that my game is a platformer. And I also kind of see their point because, to be completely honest, I don't think I'm great at making a platformer. I think I'm great at making a narrative game, but the platforming part is a much bigger challenge to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to an investor and I said, oh, I know, by the way, that narrative platformers aren't very popular right now, but we were actually thinking of changing our game direction to a narrative puzzle platformer. And he goes, that's even worse. So it's like, it's a huge, this is like kind of the opinion I hold, right? Like, no investors, no game. It doesn't matter how passionate I am about the game, no game. It doesn't come out, right? And so like I am willing to make sacrifices to appease the investors, but of course then it's like it's definitely a balance, right? This is something that I actually am in conflict with my team members about. Some of my team members share their perspective of, well, I'm making this game for me. I'm not making it for an investor. So if I don't like the game, I'm not going to make it. I don't care if an investor's involved, right? Mm-hmm. But like I kind of share a different perspective where I'm a bit more business oriented, and it's like this is our first big serious game. We can appease the investors now, and then when that game is successful, the next game we decide what we want to do, right? Yeah. So this is something that we clash back and forth over. Of course, it's respectful disagreement. My studio is not on the verge of collapsing.
Yeah.
But like, it is something that I take a lot in consideration from. And it's something that I also, is very controversial to me, like content creation wise. So like, I make videos about game development, and sometimes the sponsors that I have are actually in opposition to the values that my game studio has. So a big one is like AI. Like in my game right now, we don't use any AI in literally anything. Not a single part is AI.
Yeah.
But like AI is going to be a part of games whether you like it or not. You might disagree with it, and there are applications of AI that I also personally disagree with, but it's going to be there whether or not you like it. And I've had offers, for example, like AI sponsorships that I've turned down because it does go in opposition to the values of my game studio. But like, I'm kind of caught in this in between where it's like, well, I kind of need money to survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, these sponsorships are very tempting to me. And I don't always agree with this. It's just really hard for me. Like, because again, I need money to survive. So I need to take on some sponsorships.
Yeah.
To be honest, the most popular sponsorship category I've ever been offered is AI. They also pay the most out of any sponsor that's ever reached out to me. And so it's just like,
they're doing a lot for their
difficult.
brand imaging right now.
It's so difficult. Like I'm really caught at a crossroads with that right now.
Yeah.
Even though I don't personally use AI in my studio, it's also just a thought of like, again, whether you like it or not, it's gonna come out. So, may as well try to promote ethical uses of it. It's very complicated.
It is. No,
I don't even know where I stand right now. Like, it's just so much turmoil in my own head because my studio doesn't use it. Other studios are going to use it. And it's also just like, my studio, we currently don't use any AI, but other studios might use AI and they can make their game for so much cheaper than my studio can. And it's like, it's already really hard to get funding and pay just a livable wage. So it's so complicated in my brain right now.
Yes. I appreciate you facing these challenges because there's so many different arguments here at the end of the day, and you can make it like, this is an ethical argument about AI, and there is, but there's also the profitable argument. There's the cost of living. There's the, offering a decent wage to your team, right? Those are other arguments. And it's really unfair of studios, especially indie studios in particular, who are working on smaller budgets, to pretend that the ethical argument is the only one that exists.
Because it's like, right now, investors are saying no to me paying a livable wage to my team, right? But it's like, what if we could get half of the art done with AI? That would decrease our budget by a lot. We are not making this choice, but it's like the what ifs, right?
Yeah.
I think like a big question is also like, so I was invited to, at GDC, Game Developer Conference, my agency, like my content creation agency, invited me to an event with Ubisoft. And Ubisoft is developing this new software about AI NPCs. And I actually will say, like, a creative team is being involved in that. So a writer and narrative designer is being compensated, voice actors, artists, etc. Like, it is the most ethical AI that can be. It's not using, AI art of other stolen, like, it's not stolen assets. It's literally all ethical because it's all created within Ubisoft, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's from the beginning. Everyone knows that this is for AI. It's not like it was made before and contracts are changing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for example, like the narrative designer will design a few characters, design like how they talk. And the software is that, like, instead of like having predetermined choices, you can speak back to the AI. So the AI is like, oh, hey, how are you feeling, partner? You can say whatever's on your mind, and then the AI will respond back in that character's voice. Again, to me, that is the most ethical use of AI that I can even see. Yeah. And so when I did that, I thought, oh, this is kind of cool, kind of promising. But then I went on Twitter and everyone was like, oh my God, you're disgusting, Ubisoft, for doing this. Like, you're so awful. And it's like, that is the most ethical use of AI. You cannot say that it's not ethical because everyone was compensated along the way and they knew it was for AI and they all agreed to do it. And yet there's so much vitriol about it. And it's like, I do have some worries because if there's so much hate about ethical AI, like, but AI will come, ethical and unethical. So I feel like if anything, we should be supporting the more ethical uses of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the challenge of when we're entering into this new stage where there's no guidelines yet. It's burst out onto the scene. It's so readily available. And the boundaries of how we engage in it is terrifying. And the conversations have to be nuanced. And to see it like on social media where we have, you know, these short little quips that we get to provide and their emotional jabs that we have. And some people can flesh out their ideas still very well on Twitter, don't get me wrong, or on whatever social media platform. But the challenge is that you can't just say this conversation shouldn't happen at all. You can't just say we have to ignore all of AI. We have to reject all of AI because unfortunately, whether you like it or not, because you're right, ethical or unethical, it's here. So we need to start finding ways and determining as a community what we feel is comfortable and counts as ethical. That's hard. And for
that is hard.
It's not like even GDC, right, is a small sampling. You can't just be like, well, let's get everyone together and we'll make a decision, right? And
yeah, I mean, like for example, like you know, I've gotten sponsorships for AI. I've been reached out to multiple times for sponsorships for AI writing, and I'm the writer and narrative designer at Songbird Studio. So it's like, it's in my best interest to not promote them.
Yeah.
But I also need money, but also they're going to exist whether or not I promote them. So it's just like, it's really complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, at the end of the day, it's also like cost of living is expensive.
Yeah.
We need to bring money in. If I do this, then I can at least help this. Like there's a lot more layers, and having this conversation exist within a vacuum isn't helpful. Don't get me wrong. And I think there's a different way in which we can evaluate it to compared to those that are like of huge organizations that do have a lot more money. Like when we look at some that are trailblazing with this and are putting it out there needs to be a higher burden there, but it's being much more understanding and willing to converse in this space. And that's really hard to find right now.
It is very hard to find. I was a little bit, I don't want to say like disappointed, but yeah, the discourse on Twitter over the Ubisoft AI thing was very harsh.
Yeah.
And it makes me worried about the future because I don't know. I feel like there's like a loud voice on Twitter saying a very anti-AI, right? But there's also like a corporate voice that's very pro-AI. And at the end of the day, if I'm going to be honest, I don't think gamers actually care if a game is made using AI, even if it's unethical. I think that there's going to be a AAA game that comes out that probably has an unethical use of AI, and it'll probably do extremely well monetarily, which doesn't necessarily sit right with me either. Meanwhile, like indie game studios are like, the spirit of indie is very anti-AI, to be completely honest. Like the spirit of indie is very much like, you and your best friends have this great idea and you want to all compensate each other well. And I am a little worried that indie's going to fall behind because of that.
Oh, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. And it is sometimes it feels like they're countered. This is a chance for indie to shine, but to see AI, is it a tool? Is it dangerous? That is actually a really fair challenge. Like this could be a catalyst for indie games to really take the spotlight, but reigning emotions, feelings, lack of ethical guidelines around it, lack of appropriate conversations, that could stifle it. Oh, that's tough.
Yeah. I mean, like this is like the last point I'll say about it, but like I would never believe in AI taking over people's jobs. Like for example, having an AI artist rather than a real artist. I will never stand for things like that, right? But when it comes to, for example, like you are a game developer in a, and I guess like a more impoverished country, right?
Yeah.
You don't have the money to pay for a bunch of artists to work on your game. And AI can elevate you to kind of still somewhat pursue your creative vision. Like, who am I to say that you shouldn't do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, you might be able to afford a $20 subscription to a monthly AI service. Like, that's much more within the realm of possibility than hiring a full team of artists, animators, voice actors, etc. Like, you're just not going to do that. If you're a young creative you don't have a lot of, you can't, right? Yeah. So it's like, I want these young artists to be empowered by AI and allow them to really like explore their creative journey. But it's also just, I don't think the conversation around AI is about empowering, poor artists. Yeah. I think it's literally like corporate can make more profit.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the hard part because you can't just say like, well, it's only in these cases you can use it for this or only in those cases, right? Like it's hard to be able to navigate that. And it certainly doesn't have to
Hmm.
be your last point. I love how you're approaching this and you're sharing very real struggles, especially as someone, who's leading with their team and trying to make appropriate choices that you think is going to be right, both in the short term and long term, in the longevity of not just what you all can create, but the survivability, the quality of life, right? At the end of the day, it's difficult, and there's a lot more questions that need to be asked of like where we're getting art, who's at least originally supplying it. Do we take like whatever from the past? We can't move it
Hmm.
unless we sign new contracts, and that's difficult, and that's a whole new form of like legal
Yeah.
difficulties. Which now you've had to like with starting a studio, you had to have like a game lawyer, right? Like somebody to help
Hmm.
write up contracts, someone. Honestly, I think people forget that lawyers are also part of the game industry or like
They
HR.
are.
Like, this is like this whole separate little side thing. At what point did you like, okay, time for us to get a lawyer? Did you just Google like game lawyer? Like, where do you find
Yeah.
someone who's an
So
expert?
I will say, okay, so I held out on getting a lawyer until I absolutely like I could not hold out any longer.
Yeah.
So at this point, yeah, I had just pitched my game concept to Xbox for my new game,
Hmm.
and they approved it. And they're going, Xbox did give me money to help me fund my next game, and I didn't have a business at that point.
Yeah.
We were in an LLC, we were nothing. We were just a group of friends who called themselves Sovereign Studio.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh no, like Xbox just told us they're gonna give us this money and we don't even have like a business bank account. So like that, we kind of went to like scramble mode, not gonna lie. Um, and thankfully there are lawyers where their specialty is games. Like they are
Okay.
specifically games lawyers, nothing else. So I got a recommendation from someone in like the games industry, and that's how we chose to work with them. We met with a couple of games lawyers. Also, games lawyers are not cheap. They charge like $700 an hour. That's not a lie. It really is like $500 to $700 an hour. I was very, very lucky, I should say. So, my studio, we were in this thing called Solstice Program. It is made by Code Coven. They are an organization that empowers women, female game developers, and they have this program that would kind of be like a pilot program for you to work on your next game, and it also give you $5,000, right? So yeah, we use those $5,000 on paying for our lawyers.
I think that's amazing. I'd love to see like there's got to be an incubator out there, right? For indies and like we're going to help provide some basics including maybe like an initial lawyer meeting or something to get like we need something out there because that would be intimidating. I mean, and I'm glad that you had support to find that, but if I'm looking at this like and if you weren't part of that or you didn't get to be part of the pilot program or you weren't part of the Xbox, like where do you like it's out of your own pocket to find
Yeah.
$700 and guarantee it's not just 1 hour that you're gonna
Oh,
need.
it's ours. We pay them thousands in our
Yeah.
first interaction. Yeah, like this is something that I actually feel really strongly about. You need money to make a game. So, for example, like to pitch to a publisher, you need to have a build. You usually want to have a vertical slice, which is a fully polished portion of your game.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you get to that? But you need to make that to tell the investors that you want more money. But to make a fully polished portion of your game takes money. Paying voice actors and artists and programmers, etc. Right? Like it's actually a lot of money to make anything.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're a game developer and you don't have savings, like what are you going to do? You literally can't make it in games. Games is not something for the working class. Like, I was very fortunate growing up. Like I grew up in a more like upper middle class area.
Yeah.
I had parents. I never had to work a job growing up. My parents paid for me. I was able to go to college and get a degree. But it's like if you don't have that growing up, the games industry feels impossible to enter. Because let's say you want to work in AAA, right? Like you're competing against people who do have a college degree, and maybe they're able to even get like game dev degrees where they have this huge network that allows them to enter the industry. If you want to go indie, how are you gonna make that polished prototype of your game with no money? And also, indies is a lot of this stuff is like behind closed doors. Like a lot of this business knowledge I was able to get from other indies, but it's like if I didn't have this network, I would have no idea how to approach anything. And it's so easy for indies to get There is this one I'm going to talk about this very, very vaguely because
Yeah.
like I don't think this person wants their info out.
Okay.
But this person was offered an extremely low amount of money, like very, very low amount of money
Mhm.
for a certain percentage of her game sales. It was embarrassingly bad, right? And she asked me and other game developers, "Hey, I just got this deal. What should I do?" And it was like the chat was blowing up. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, don't take it. This is like
Yeah.
god awful." But like, what if you didn't have that network, right?
Right. You'd be like,
Most
well, you'd
people
be
don't have that
tempted.
network.
If somebody said
You
yes,
might not
even if
know.
it wasn't a
Yeah.
good yes, you'd be like, at least they said yes of sorts.
Right. Like, to her, she thought, oh, maybe this is getting my foot in the door.
Yeah.
But like through people being like, no, that's an awful idea, people were like, you can get that same amount of money easily through a Kickstarter. And through a Kickstarter, you're not going to give up this percentage of your game. So she did a Kickstarter. It was very successful. And then she got the money she needed. Right. But it's like, if you didn't have that advice, you wouldn't know. I've been extremely fortunate to have amazing contacts. So pretty earlier on in my game dev career, I got featured in the Game Awards. And that was like the big breaking point for me. I suddenly had this network of people who'd also been featured in the Game Awards, and meet people from there, and that's really what opened me up to like getting all this business acumen. For example, when you work with a games publisher, this is like if anyone here is interested in this, usually the agreement is 100-0 before recoup. So let's say they invested $1 million, they take 100% of all of your sales until they reach $1 million. And then afterwards, it's 50-50. So then you guys split the money evenly. That's a very common arrangement, right?
Woo.
But like, who is just publicly saying that that's the common arrangement? I don't know that anywhere. I only know that because my game lawyers told me, right? That's not public information.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to get taken advantage of, or just literally like have no idea what the hell you're doing because all this information is so secret.
Yes. And that's horrifying. Like if you were to hear that the first time and be like, that's standard, I think it also shows the power discrepancy between like publishers are like, this is how much we're going to demand. And like, that is a lot. That's terrifying. And not to be like, to not make anything for that first amount is heartbreaking. Wow.
Yeah, it is. But that's just kind of how it is, right? And like, okay, even let's say you are like, so you are a prodigy. You can make this vertical slice completely on your own. You can do the art, the story, the programming. Like you are just a god among game developers, right? And you get that conversation with a publisher and you get a contract, 100% you need a lawyer. 100%. But again, what if you don't have the money? Even if you're a god of game developing, you need that lawyer. The lawyer is going to cost you thousands of dollars for that, back and forth on the contract. Also, one thing a lot of people don't realize is that it's not like a publisher says yes and next week you're working full time on the game. These agreements can take 6 months to a year to negotiate. So the publisher says yes, 10 months can pass before you signed your name on the paper.
For those 10 months, okay, so you make your slice, right? You create it, you present it. For those 10 months, hoping that you get money for it, do you just stall or wait? Or do you keep making the game hoping that somebody comes through? That's a long time.
What do you do, right?
Yeah,
I don't even know, right? For me, I don't have unlimited money. My money from Xbox is going to run out.
Yeah.
Also, I'm not paying myself. Me and my leads, we all chose to take none of the money from Xbox so we could pay our people, right? But we've just been working for free on this. And even when a publisher says, yes, we're going to be working for free for another 10 months. It's just, that's why I'm like, don't do this. And my advice for people in games, don't do this unless you think that this is the only thing that will make you happy, or just it is 100% games over other mediums, because it's like, why would you put yourself through this?
Yeah. You really need to have a strong vision of this is what I want. I need to change this world because, I mean, nothing else is going to keep you eating, right? Oh my goodness. These timelines I get, right? Sometimes making business decisions, especially when it's a certain amount of money being pushed, but for studios, you're just stuck until you find out more. That is such an eye-opening and difficult space. So on the flip side, right? We see investors, we talk about publishers, we're talking about business. How about the community of gamers? How do you get them on your side? How do you start reaching out to them in a meaningful way? I love, of course, the idea of like, instead of the corporate account, it's Sondering Emily, right? Like there's a connectedness that comes from that. How do you build a rapport with people that are interested on that end?
Yeah, so similar to how It Tastes the Past was a mistake, Sondering Emily was also a mistake.
What? So you don't have to label these as mistakes.
Or like, I never meant to be Sondering Emily. So what really happened is that I made A Taste of the Past, and I was like, oh, some people like it online. Like maybe I should like make a video about it, just to promote the game.
Yeah.
Right. So I made a couple videos about A Taste of the Past, and I was like, oh well, I can only make so many videos about this game. Like, I want people to start following my studio and my studio game traction. So then I started doing like game dev tips. And then I grew like a small following on TikTok, posted on TikTok for a while. And then, and the TikTok was Sondering Studio, it was not Sondering Emily at the time. Yeah. And I was like, this video did really well on my TikTok. I should just post it on my Instagram, right? So I think I had 800 followers on Instagram at the time. They're all just like friends. It wasn't like a public facing account. And I posted that video, and then that video got 2 million views.
Whoa.
So I gained 6,000 followers in one day, like 24 hours.
This is a whole new book. I'm sorry.
Oh my God, what's going on? So like I at that time, like my username was something completely different too. It was like, unrelated to Sondering, but I was like, okay, I'll change it to Sondering Emily, because I was like, I didn't want it to be Sondering Studio because I was posting it on my personal account.
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, let me just continue on this. And so I just kept making videos, and then I'm just still making videos. So like, again, I never thought I'd be a content creator. In fact, I actually thought that I actually don't think content creation is for me, to be honest. Like, I don't think
the one with 2 million views on there. Yeah.
Like it was just an accident that I fell into it, because when I posted the video on my Instagram, it was more so like, oh, my friends and family can see what I've been working on.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, I think that strangers are going to see it and blow up my account and make me a content creator, influencer, whatever you want to call it, right? It was more just like, oh my gosh, that huge boost. I thought I should take advantage of this opportunity. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Yeah. So I kept making videos, and then in like the past year of making videos, that was about a little over a year ago, I literally went from 800 followers to like today I have over 160,000 followers.
Get it.
I really don't know how it happened.
No, you do. You just told us how it happened.
I know, but like, I didn't try to be like, I hear stories of people who try really, really hard to be a content creator, right? And they try for years until they get that viral video. My first video was that viral video, and it wasn't even meaning to be viral.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, virality aside, like when it happened, you were smart and you're like, we got to take advantage of this. Let's start telling this story. Let's put it out there and have these conversations, right? And you found people that are like, yes, I want to hear what you have to say in your chats, right? In the comment section below, that's where discussion happens. Some are very interesting and helpful. And then there's a handful of like, okay, well, you're here.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, I realized I didn't even answer your question.
Listen,
the question you had before.
You're allowed to give whatever answer you want. I'm happy to take whatever you're giving me because it's all insightful. But if you want to go back, you can.
Yes. So to answer your question, in terms of like how I relate to my audience, again, it was a big decision when I labeled my account Sondering Emily and not Sondering Studio. That was to me like, okay, this is my account and not necessarily representing of like my company. Because I did want to share like my thoughts about things in the game dev industry and not have that necessarily represent the views of Sondering Studio. So for me, like the approach that I've always taken in my content creation is that I am not a tutorial channel. I like strongly, I make insightful content, but I'm not necessarily educational. I'm not going to teach you how to use Unity. I'm not going to give you a coding tutorial. I might give game tips here and there, but like you're not going to learn how to make games just from watching my videos. I take a much more personal approach. So, I like to make fun of myself as a game developer. I think a big thing is also like I'm very vulnerable with my audience about my game dev struggles. So, I frequently get comments about how I'm not a real game developer because I haven't worked at a AAA studio, right? So I talk openly about how that can cause insecurity in me and my leading abilities. I'm also like, again, as I said, like I don't really identify as a content creator. I never try to be a content creator. So like, all of a sudden, like when people are perceiving my appearance, like that's just like very foreign and weird to me. And it's caused me to have a very strained relationship with how I look. Like, I don't know if I'm attractive or ugly or where I am in between because my comments are telling me all these different things. So it's kind of led to a more like neutral self-view or like a confused self-view. And all these different things, right? About game development, being insecure about my game dev abilities, like to even again like my body image. Like this is a very like personal topic, but I really try to delve into all of it. Things that I'm ashamed to admit, things that I'm proud to admit, like being in Forbes 30 to 30. Like my content is a mixture of all of it, good and bad.
Yes. I think that's such an interesting side result when you talk about like how you look, because when you're in this, you're like, I'm doing a business, I'm making content, I'm focused, and your content isn't about like, you're not doing makeup tutorials or talking about it that would be much more beauty oriented, right? You're not talking about fashion where people are talking about what you're wearing. You're talking about, right, your work that you create, and people bring in these personal aspects that now suddenly become part of these, what's in your professional space that should, in any other industry, we would say, no, we don't talk about that because how you look doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, right? And how you're doing this work. What a strange and uncomfortable space to be in.
Yeah, like, okay, so for me, like my personal view is that I am not very body positive. And what I mean by that is like, I don't necessarily desire to look at myself and be like, oh, you're so beautiful. I kind of to subscribe more to body neutrality, where I just like to be neutral about my body. My body works, and like for me, I just don't really like to think about my appearance. Like I think way more about everything else going on in my life, right? But I acknowledge that my appearance is a huge factor in my videos, and so like I know, for example, that like if I put on makeup before a video and like like put my do flattering angles on my face, that video is literally 10 times more likely to go viral. So it's like a weird dynamic where I'm hyper aware of the way I look, even though I personally don't want to be.
Yeah. And what a strange thing, but it's part of it still, as you're getting your story out and you're trying to get people to listen. It's still a consideration. Wow, that is wild. Okay. For the rest of your team, not really wanting to be on social media, have some of them started to trickle into it a little bit more? Or they're like, we see you do that, we're proud of you?
It's really funny. Like, okay, so I was talking to another founder of a successful studio, and I was telling her about like my social media strategy. Cause like, I have a pretty big following for a game developer. Like it's a very concentrated niche. And so I was telling her my strategy of I am the face of everything, right? And then she was like, oh, well, like I worry about that strategy for my studio because other members might not feel included. And that is like a big problem, by the way, like in games in general, like having developers be credited for their work, all that stuff. But I guess have like, I have the perfect strategy for it because my team does not want to be seen. Like, they prefer to be in the shadows. Like I've offered to include them and like very lukewarm responses every time. I think they're very, very happy that I took the front facing role and that they're not in the content. So it's a perfect relationship for us. But in other teams, it may not be the right thing to do.
I like that you're considering what they want, because some teams, I mean, I've seen it before of like, all right, we need someone to talk about this. This is now part of your job. Hop on up there. And it exposes them to a very public audience with all the comments of, everything that comments will add on that. So I love that you take that on, and it feels like another challenge that you take on for your team. You really are protective of them. You really want to give them the best kind of environment you can, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that like going on this journey with me, of course we're in it together, but like it's a huge risk for all of us.
Yeah.
For example, like, you know, I used to work at Meta, like a big tech company, right? And now I make indie games. I have like members of my studio who like work at AAA companies or,
Yeah.
you know, like big tech companies. And it's like, you know, one day, like we do plan on trying to have more of us go full time, and they would have to be leaving those nice, cushy jobs for a very difficult job that will not pay as well.
Yep.
And like, I just think like it's like, I'm so lucky to have found people who are willing to go that extra mile. Games, again, it's so much more than the game. Like, it's really, really about the people.
Yeah.
If you don't have good synergy, there is no good game. The people come before the game, right? So I think I am very protective of them. Like, I remember, like, we did like a stream where we were making dumplings for Chinese New Year, right?
Oh.
And I was like, any slightly mean comment about any like my team members, insta ban.
Yeah.
Like, I can take that, right? But
Yeah.
I don't want them to see those types of comments.
Yes, I love it that you protect them. But I think that also establishes an important rule that you're teaching your community of like how we talk to people, treating them with respect, what is and isn't allowed. The more, you know, leeway that we give, the more we're opening the door to that kind of conversation and saying, yeah, I guess it can be here. We don't like it, but we'll allow it. And you don't put that out there for your whole team. And that helps not just your team, but your community as you learn and you improve. I love that. I think that's so important. And that's hard to say, be like, well, now we just lost a viewer, but it's like, no, they weren't one we wanted.
Yeah. Like, that's something that I've definitely been grappling with, like in my like content creation journey. So like a good example of this is I made a video for Pride Month sharing games with LGBT representation.
Yeah.
There's people on my team who are part of the LGBT community. It's something that we like obviously very much support and stand for. And I literally got unfollowed by 1,000 people that day
What?
for that video. It was just insane. I was
Really?
like, I didn't think that this was that controversial of a video.
Yeah.
People were like, you're a snowflake. You know, I thought you were all about the games, but you're all about being woke. I'm unfollowed. Literally 1,000 people unfollowed me that day. I was shocked because I was like, I did not foresee that reaction, right? But even though like it was sad, I guess, to lose those following,
Yeah.
I think ultimately like I learned from it like the power of like using your voice. Sometimes it's good to cleanse your community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. You're like, why would you think that? Of course, this is content that we're making. It's important. It's a great highlight, amazing games to be showcased. And then you get at least 1,000 people, right? You think like how these people still exist in this space and feel comfortable voicing that.
Yeah, I had about 90,000 followers at the time, so it was like more than 1% of my audience unfollowed because of that video.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That is insane. Oh, wow. I mean, at the same time, you're like, again, like, go ahead, leave. You're obviously not the kind of audience that we want, but it's still knowing that they're part of the gaming community, and where they go, they're going to go to some other influencer who's either agreeing with them or they're going to go harass another content creator, right? Like, and say like, this isn't what we want. There's no space for this, calling it wokeness, right? And it continues to shut down those individuals for who they are. It's baffling. I guess I'm glad that you made that video, because I think it's important that we do have to voice these things out to let them know that they don't have their own little safe space, right? Like, all these places need to be welcoming. They need to know that idea doesn't have a place in the gaming space.
For sure.
Wow.
I think that there was like some controversy recently about like wokeness in games, aka like people of color in games. And there was a huge audience saying like, oh, like wokeness ruins games. You know, why do these games need to be diverse? Like, that's the reason that they're so bad. And it's like, you don't realize that, like, you know, of course, like the game developer community has a huge problem with diversity in terms of like having women and people of color in teams, right? But like at the end of the day, like there are people of color and women, people with disabilities, people part of the LGBT community making games. And of course, they're going to tell stories that resonate with them. Like, there isn't some like force that's forcing games to be woke. It's just the identity of our community.
Yes. It's about, right, creating heartfelt stories. It's about creating games that resonate with us, that energize us, that excite us, that allow us to feel be a part of something, right? And of course, it's going to embed us. What artist doesn't have a little piece of themselves when they create something? Even if it's something they end
Right.
up not liking, it's still, there's part of them in it at that point.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of some of the artwork I've drawn. It's not impressive, right? But it's still part of like the decisions I made, right? What I think is worth seeing, the perspective that I'm seeing it from, like that's embedded in it no matter what. So, of course, we're going to start seeing more of that, and not seeing it as an opportunity to get richer, more vibrant, and unique stories is such a misstep. What a lost opportunity on their behalf. Um,
Yeah.
was that
Like
immature of
gamers
me?
are so diverse.
Yeah.
Like gamers are so diverse. So of course we should have diverse games.
Yeah. It makes sense. It makes sense. Oh, so as you're talking about like this diversity in your game, as you have this adding to of course the variety of games that we have, was the reception always very kind, or did you all get a few that were unkind in that space?
Well, this is something that I actually really wanted to talk about. I haven't really talked about it publicly, but it's something that really bothered me that happened recently. So my team at GDC on Monday, we had two pitching events. The first pitching event was just like a general one. And how the pitching events work is that you submit your game, and if they like you, they pick you to be part of the event. And then you have a rapid fire pitch, like 10 minutes to present your game to a bunch of investors. And it's also like a big honor to even get picked in the event because it's usually very competitive.
Mhm.
So we had two set up. The first one, which is a general one, and the second was set up by Xbox themselves.
Oh, sweet.
And then the first pitching event, there were a lot of people that came, and it ended up being a bit more fruitful for us. There were some people who said that they wanted to follow up about our game. And the second one that was hosted by Xbox, and the nicest way I can say this, no one came. And it was a little disappointing, and it was especially sad because my representative at Xbox, who is an amazing person, I should say, like genuinely the best person ever, he gave this beautiful speech at the beginning about how investing in diverse games is not about charity. It's about nurturing the next generation of game developers.
Mhm.
These games do have a purpose in the industry, and they can be successful. And it's like, oh, there's an audience of like two people were watching.
What?
And it made me kind of sad because it of course, like, you know, there could be other factors, like maybe the Xbox one was not as well organized, I don't know, but like, you know, again, the general pitching event to have a full room of people, and then the one about diverse games having like two people in the audience, like it did kind of send a negative message to me about how diverse games aren't being valued. And it really is sad because I think my game has a lot of market value because it's diverse. Not just the fact that it's appealing to, has a very set target demographic, Asian Americans, there's a ton of us, but like it also can have a huge audience in China. China is such an untapped market that Western audiences don't necessarily, like Western developers may not understand how to market to. I understand that because I am that. And so, like, you know, it's not just a charity thing. Like, this game has potential to see success in various regions, and yet it feels like
It's a missed
the investors
chance.
aren't seeing that.
Yeah, they're not seeing the opportunity that's there to break into new markets, to reach
Mhm.
people on a, and can create, not just reach people, but to connect with people, create something that is meaningful, to create people that want to keep coming back and have loyalty and start
Mhm.
identifying, right? Like that's the space. Like I remember like for so long, like I am an Xbox person. I'm sorry, PlayStation. All right. I am an Xbox person. And that choice is something that they want to still be able to create. And if they're not taking new opportunities to see that and foster that, what what are they doing here? Are they just afraid? Is that what you think it is? Is it that they just don't think it's worth it? What is this perceive? Like, what's the barrier that at least gets them to say, like, we should at least show up and hear? I mean, what? I don't understand.
I also don't understand, but
Yeah.
I do understand at the same time.
Okay.
Okay, so you know, my game hits very, very well, but to a niche audience, right? Because your average gamer is like Call of Duty, League of Legends, Valorant.
Mhm.
Like the average gamer doesn't think of heartfelt story about coming of age and
Yeah.
mythology and all that stuff, right? And so, you know, like if you want to hit like the mass market, if you want to hit words like casual,
Mhm.
sim, multiplayer, co-op, like those are like the buzzwords, I guess, for what investors see as like a much more like, I guess, a confident usage of their money versus heartfelt, beautiful, evocative, inclusive, doesn't ring those same dollar signs.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why they don't look at games like mine as seriously. I just don't think that investors are not necessarily plugged into the game developing world. They're more much plugged into the money making world. And so like,
Yeah.
I think like for them, it's a more reliable usage of their dollar, even though obviously games like mine have been successful too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I think that's fair. Throughout all of this, you've shown a lot of very balanced take of seeing both sides. Like I understand here's what they're doing. And I think that also is another reason why, one, your team loves you, but I think is why you all are continuing to survive and create cool work is because you see these nuances of like, okay, well, here's where they're coming from. I don't like it that, or I'm like that they didn't even show up, but here's the challenge. And you're not allowing to create walls in that. Like, well, they just didn't show up. That's the end of the story. They're just being stupid. And while yes, they are being stupid, you're looking beyond that too. I think that takes a lot of patience, but also wisdom in this space.
Most investors are, to be honest, like white men, and so like they just don't understand sometimes like the value of a cultural story being told. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that because all the people who hold all the money are that demographic, you kind of have to appeal to that demographic. Mm-hmm. So that's the big challenge ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think this shows like a much larger conversation as we talk about like bridging gaps, how diversity has the opportunity to help grow instead of put barriers. I'm going to put a small nod towards a conversation in the chat right now because I see that, right? Like every situation isn't just black and white. As communities build up, there's not just one voice or one opinion that comes through. And I think when we think of diversity, sometimes we default to say like, oh, well, you're Asian, you tell Asian stories, right? And it really waters down who a person is, right? We can do more than one thing. Like when we represent ourselves, it's parts of ourselves. It's not always just one thing. Like sometimes I really don't like when people bring me on to different panels because I'm just a woman and then they only ask me questions about being a woman. And it's like, well, I'm more than just a woman. That's like not all that I do. And if I, when I tell stories and I'm performing, I don't just play humans. Like I play a rabbit. I've never been a rabbit before. All right. I think it'd be really cute and fluffy and might be a really fun life to live, but I'm not a rabbit. But it's thinking about when we're working on things and giving us as creators that space to choose what we want to share in ourselves and to be able to have those doors open to reveal and create what we want in those doors, right? And when we do talk about representation, that we have people who are speaking from real experience and that they want to do that. What's your take on that, Emily? Does that feel pretty similar? Or you?
No, I feel like everything you just said was beautiful. I was going to give you an applause for an amazing speech.
Well, thanks. And it just shows like there's further conversations that need to happen when we talk about diversity, but continuing to do more and talking to people. I think that's the greatest thing that we can do is seeing people, understanding them. This really, it makes me think of going back to the initial conversation of why you wanted to do Heartfelt. And why I love that this is a genre of game that you go into is because this is something that all humans need. Right? It's our chance to see beyond just, well, you're just this one thing, and even though your main audience might be towards Asians and Asian Americans, right, this is a story that it can be resonated with anybody, right? Even if you just like cooking. I mean, most people eat at some point in time in their life, right? And having relationships with food. There's plenty of ways that this can still connect. And I think people start to categorize themselves in certain ways and prohibit or put blinders up to say, well, we can connect over more things than that. I hope more people play your game. I really do, because I'm very excited about the pillars that you bring to life in it.
Well, thank you for that. Definitely, I want to touch a little bit about what you said. We did make a very conscious choice to share our Asianness, Asian American stories in our game. But what's really important for us is that our game is not played by just Asians. I think it can expose new audiences to our culture and also just like how relatable our culture is. So for example, for A Taste of the Past, I had a lot of people of different cultures playing and being like, oh my God, like, you know, I'm Hispanic, but my mom is just like that too. And we face similar struggles. And that was really, really heartwarming to hear. There is one of my favorite movies is called The Half of It. And it's about an Asian high schooler who is gay. And when they were doing like testing for the movie to like see how people would react, they specifically went to very conservative areas to see how people felt about the movie because they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just like, you know, a very target audience. They wanted to have a universal appeal. And they found that a lot of people who watched the movie said, oh, would you recommend this movie to your friend? No, I would not recommend it to my friend because I know my friend doesn't share the, like, you know, has opposing views to this movie. But that being said, like, I really like the movie. And I felt like, you know, this really did resonate with me. And that's kind of how I want it to be with my game. People of all different cultures can play it and still resonate with it. I think, like, for example, like, I recently watched like the Spider-Verse movies and like they were really, really good, right? And it exposed me to like a you know, new culture, a new perspective that I may not have been otherwise exposed to. And I want my game to kind of like fill that, you know?
Yes. Yeah. As it turns out, I am not a young African-American boy, but that movie was phenomenal and it made me feel things. Yeah. I'm like, you know, there's so much more. It makes me think of like DNA wise, we have a lot in similar with a banana. And if we can recognize that, how much more can we have with humans? And why aren't we focusing on those, right? Those similarities that we have.
Yeah. Like, I think like the theme of my games are very much about like unity, different perspectives coming to go together, forgiving each other, seeing each other's perspectives. Like that's like a very big thing you'll see in my next game.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Okay. We're running out of time. So I'm going to have to close out tonight's show because I wish we could have more. One, I want us to be able to play your game when it launches. We need to come on stream. We need to have a show for this. I'm so thrilled about this. And of course, tell us where we can follow Sondre and Emily. Where can we stay updated? And of course, like, where can we play, you know, the game? Give us all of the details.
Yeah, so you can follow me, Sondering Emily. I'll like type hi in the chat so like you know the way to spell it. On Instagram and YouTube. You can also follow Sondering Studio on TikTok. Although my TikTok is kind of like my shitpost account, so don't expect the highest quality posts. More my Instagram and my YouTube. You can also follow Sondering Studio on Twitter. It's not that exciting, but if you're a game developer, like, and you want a job, sometimes we do post job postings on there, so that is really important. You can play A Taste of the Past for free on Steam and on itch.io. For my next game, we've actually been in conversations about announcing it. So previously we said we weren't going to announce it because we wanted to get an investor first. And now we're seeing that maybe announcing it is the way to generate interest and money for my game. So currently the plan is end of summer, but TBD on that. 2024, I would say. This year, I will probably announce my game and I'll do it on my socials so you can check more of that out.
Okay, awesome. That's amazing. I can't wait. Okay. So you all heard it. Easy to do. If anything, you've got a link tree as well, which makes it really easy on all of your platforms. So as long as you can find one of the platforms, you can find all of the platforms. So no excuses. This is your chance to continue to share support. All right. Thank you, Emily, for being so open with everything. Your insights have been so much fun. I feel like I've had a lot more facial reactions today. I'm like, what? That alone is just it's such important. It's so important that we're having these conversations. So thank you for leading us through this, being our guide and being so wonderful throughout this whole thing.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm super excited to have joined you on this. Also, you're very eloquent, which I admire.
When I just said such importance, yes, thank you.
No, but you really are. This has been a really lovely conversation, and thank you everyone for watching.
Oh, of course. All right. Well, good friends, we're going to wrap up with Emily here. If you want to stick around, you always can. You will have more reruns down below. Of course, you can watch some of the older VODs. And next Monday, we'll be back with another episode of Pink Pixels. So come join us. It's a good place. I love all the conversations. Thank you for coming here, asking genuine positions, sharing your experiences. This is how we continue to learn more. This is how we continue to be better. All right, friends. We'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.